live onto all of our social media platforms as well as on Zoom. So thank you ever so much for joining us. We're getting ready for an evening all about dry eye and glaucoma. So I will give it just one more minute until everybody is signed in, and then we will get going as usual. We'll start with a short poll, find out where everybody is now, how much everybody knows at the beginning of the night, and then hopefully come the end of the night, we all know a little bit more than we did at the beginning of the night. So it's been a little while since I've been on a digital support group. So for those of you who join us regularly, it's lovely to see you all. And for those who are new to the sessions, welcome. Welcome. It's really, really lovely to have you join us. I'm just getting sorted on the other platforms, and whilst we do that, I am going to launch the poll because I am very aware we've got a lot to rattle through tonight. So polls and quizzes, here we are. Let's launch. Where are we starting from? So we are one question, one click of a button would be wonderful from everybody. How much do you know about dry eye? What do we know already? What can you tell me? Fabulous. It's so nice to see all these results ticking in. Brilliant. Some who know nothing, quite a few who know a little bit. And then as ever, we've got some experts in the room. Always great. So we'll leave that up. Gosh, 72 of you answered already. That's brilliant. Fabulous. Right, I'm going to pull the poll down. One last opportunity to get those answers in. And then I'm going to end that poll. Fabulous. Wonderful. So I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our speaker this evening. This is Dan Calladine, and he is joining us. He's a consultant ophthalmologist, and he is here to talk all things dry eye with us. I will let him introduce himself more extensively than that, but it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us this evening, and thank you ever so much for joining us. We are really looking forward to learning everything there is to know, or not, all about dry eye. So I'm going to hand over. Thanks ever so much, Dan.
Okay, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes, Dan.
So, good evening, everybody. I'm just going to share screen just to bring up the talk. Okay, so is that sharing okay?
Perfect. Yes, Dan. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. Well, good evening, everyone. So I'm Dan Calladine. I'm a consultant ophthalmologist, work in Worcester and also Little Aston around the West Midland area. Now, my subspecialty is cornea and sort of anterior segment eye disease. So I see quite a lot of patients with dry eye. And I'm also fortunate to look after quite a large cohort of patients who suffer from glaucoma and on a number of glaucoma drops. So over the years, I've had quite a bit of experience in seeing patients on glaucoma drops and seeing some of the dry eye woes that they go through on a routine basis, and hopefully have a few strategies to help deal with these things. So just to orientate you, because I know we've got a mixed group of delegates today, we're talking about the surface of the eye today. So we're not talking about any of the complex structures inside the eye. So glaucoma obviously is a disease at the back of the eye, the nerve at the back of the eye, due to excessive fluid production inside the eye and pressure problems. But these fluids don't really bear any relevance to the surface of the eye, which is completely separate. The eye is extremely well contained as a unit. And therefore, when we're talking about dry eye, we're talking about the surface of the eye, the front of the eye, the cornea and the white of the eye. So when you look at somebody's eye and you look at the pupil, We're talking about that cornea, that clear window on the front of the eye, the white of the eye, and also underneath and on the edges of the eyelids. So the surface of the eye is really complex. I'm sure you're all aware of just how sensitive your eyes can be if you get a fly in the eye or an eyelash or somebody scratches your eye. And that sensation means that irritation from dryness on the surface of the eye can be extremely uncomfortable. The surface of the eye is also extremely important in terms of our vision, because the shape of the eye determines what we can see. Most of the focusing power of the eye is not the lens inside the eye, like a lot of people think. That's only maybe about 10% of our ability to focus. 90% of it comes from the shape of the cornea. And the most important part of that is the tear film on the surface of the cornea. So as the light's coming into the eye and hitting the surface of the eye, the first thing it hits is actually the water on the tear film on the cornea. So if the tear film is irregular and distorted due to dry eye, the vision is going to be very blurred. Now, the surface of the eye is made up essentially of the same type of cells that make up our skin. But it's not like the skin at all. It's a mucous membrane. It's constantly moist. And because of that, there's quite a high turnover of cells. And it's also very sensitive to our environments. If, for instance, you think of your skin, an allergen can touch the skin and sometimes not cause too much of irritation because it can be washed off quite quickly. But on the surface of the eye, it tends to soak into the tear film and spread around the eye quite quickly. So it's not surprising when you think of it that glaucoma drops have a huge impact on the surface of the eye and in terms of vision and discomfort. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, you may or may not know there are two types of tears. There's the natural tears, which are really full of good stuff. So they're mainly water and electrolytes, but they also contain oils, secretions from some of the glands along the edge of the eyelid. They also contain mucus, which helps the tears bind to the eye, and over 1,500 different proteins with specialist functions. For instance, lysozymes, which are really important. These are enzymes which can break down the cell walls of bacteria and help prevent against infection. Now, there's also the crying tear, which if someone pokes you in the eye or if you're sad and you're crying, that produces a really salty, excessive wash of tears. And that can wash away, actually, the natural tears. So if you've been crying for half an hour or so, your eyes can become extremely sore. And it's important to understand the interaction of the natural tears and the crying tears. Because if you're deficient in the natural tears, the eyes can become irritated. And so one of the first signs of dry eyes is that the eyes water. And patients often say, well, it seems almost like paradoxical that actually I've got dry eye, but my eyes are watering. I can't quite understand that. And that's because in the early stages, the irritation from not having enough natural tears means that you produce more crying tears. And this can affect people, for instance, if you're going outdoors and there's cold wind and your eyes start watering, that might actually be a sign that you're deficient in the natural tears and producing too many of the crying tears. Now, the tears are made in three areas: the lacrimal glands, and I've got some pictures of those on the next slide, the meibomium glands, which are oil glands on the eyelids, and the goblet cells, which produce mucus. And the traditional view is that three elements, water, oil, and mucus, mix together to make a tri-layer of tears on the surface of the eye. This tri-layer can be understood in terms of if you imagine oil floating on water, it tends to float on the surface. And so the oil component tends to stabilize the tear film. Now, it's not entirely strict, and the tear film does interact with different layers. But generally speaking, the mucus binds to the surface of the eye, the water sits on the mucus, and the oil sits on the surface of the water. So it's quite a complicated structure. But this allows it to lubricate the eye and protects the surface and maintains the clarity of vision. So here's some pictures of where the tears are made. So we have a picture of the eye, and underneath the skin up here above the upper eyelid is the lacrimal gland. And this will be producing most of the water component that goes onto the eye. The top right picture shows the little meibomium glands, which are underneath the skin again, and they open onto the edge of the eyelid, and they produce the oil which floats on the surface. And then the bottom right picture, each of these little black dots around the eye are the goblet cells. And this shows the concentration of the goblet cells in different parts of the eye. And these three structures together help to produce the tears. So here's some real life pictures, okay? So in ophthalmology, we use dyes to help show these various structures. So if we look at the bottom right picture first, you can see a green dye along the edge of the eyelid and on the surface of the eye. And this green dye is binding to some of the mucus and the goblet cells, which have been irritated. So you can see there's some irritated goblet cells, and you can see some of the green dye in the natural tears of the eye. The other picture shows a yellow dye or yellow-green dye, which is fluorescein. And fluorescein is water soluble. And fluorescein is put in the eye, and we look at it through a microscope, and it dissolves into the water element of the tears. So we can tell by looking at these two dyes what type of dry eye you have. Now here's a complex picture, but this is just showing how complicated the tear film is. So the picture on the left shows the cornea cells in orange, and then the mucus, which are these little filaments, almost like little branching trees, which trap the water above there, which is full of proteins and good things for the eye. And then the little oil, the green globules sit on the surface there to maintain its integrity. The goblet cells that produce the mucus are scattered through the surface of the white of the eye, and you can see them there in this histology stain. And the picture on the right shows what happens to goblet cells when the eye is irritated. So the goblet cells are designed to produce mucus if the eye is irritated to try and help protect the surface. So if you're not producing enough tears, then the nerves in the cornea start to fire and cause irritation. And then that sends back signals to the goblet cells to produce more mucus. So one of the types of dry eye that I see quite a lot is when there's inflammation on the eye and there's excessive mucus production. Now, you probably all suffer from some symptoms of dry eye, hence being on this call. And these symptoms vary quite a lot depending on what type of dry eye you have and the severity. So I mentioned earlier how, ironically, sometimes dry eye actually makes the eye water. So if you're noticing that your eyes are watering when you're going outside in the wind, that means you've probably got mild dry eye, and you probably just need to supplement the tears with some dry eye drops. If your vision's starting to fluctuate, so if you find you have to blink a few times to clear the vision, that's also a sign that you're not producing enough tears and that you're getting symptoms of dry eye. And that can often get worse as the day goes on. So the eyes can start to feel a bit tired in the evening, and the vision can get a bit blurred. And sometimes it can actually become painful at night. You might find that you're having difficulty opening the eyes in the morning due to them being dry overnight. The way our eye replenishes tears is by blinking. So when you blink, it smears the tears over the surface of the eye. But of course, at night, you're asleep and your eyes are not blinking, and therefore you're not replenishing the tear film on the eye. And so it can actually feel very dry and sore in the morning. I've had some patients who sleep and their eyes are a little bit open at night. And that can be really sore in the morning, and they can have a line of dryness between where the lids should meet. And also a number of patients who have sleep apnea and have machines overnight that pump oxygen and air through masks, and these create drafts which can then also dry the surface of the eye. So if you're getting problems with your eyes at night, that probably is going to be dry eyes. Now, if your eyes are dry, they're going to be very sensitive, and this is where I see a lot of patients putting in glaucoma drops, and they get a lot of stinging from the glaucoma drops, and they have to try and move to preservative-free drops wherever possible, and also lubricate the eye just before and just after putting in the glaucoma drops. And if your eyes are dry, you could find that you've been to the optometrist, optician, and they've prescribed some new glasses for you, but actually the glasses turn out to be wrong or changing. And that's probably because on the day you went, your eye might have been more or less dry than when you were trying the glasses afterwards. So sometimes the optometrists find it really difficult to get the right glasses prescription if you've got dry eyes. Okay, so from that previous slide, you probably associate some of your dry eye symptoms with what I've talked about. But why is it happening? Well, there are lots of reasons, and they often interact. There's not usually one specific reason. A common reason is just not producing enough natural tears. And this happens with age and sometimes medicines. So it's worth looking at, obviously you can't do anything about your age, but it's worth looking at what medicines you take. And beta blockers, for instance, are a good example of a very common medicine, which lots of people take as tablets, and that can cause reduced tear production. So it's worth looking down your list of medicines. And if you do suffer from dry eye, that's a really quick, easy fix. You can look down there, look through the side effects. And if you see one of your medicines and it says dry eye is potentially one of the side effects, or just pop it into an internet search. And I mean, depending on what you search for, you might find the result that you want or don't want. But if you try and find the association between one of your medicines and dry eye, that's definitely something to pop along to the GP and say, look, I'm struggling with dry eye. I'm having to use my eye drops quite a lot. I just wonder if it's this medicine, and is there an alternative I could take? The hormonal problems are quite common. So menopause or hormone imbalances can cause periods of dry eye. Often that can settle down, but it can be quite severe. And then in terms of medical conditions, things like thyroid disease, rheumatoid arthritis are probably the two most common. Sjogren's is a type of autoimmune type dry eye, which tends to cause a lot of problems with dry mouth as well. Now, previous cancer treatments can actually cause dry eye as well, because if you've had any chemotherapy in the past, that can actually target some of those delicate goblet cells that we talked about, because they're cells that have quite a high turnover and quite a high activity. And chemotherapy tends to target cells that have a high turnover or high activity. It may be that it's due to a position of your eyelid. So it's worth just making sure that your eyelids are not drifting open at night, or you're sleeping in a position where the eye's drifting open or rubbing. And also, when you're blinking, you might not be fully blinking. Some people have a reduced blink reflex, and that can be the problem. Now, just moving on, then inflammation is a common cause of dry eye. So if you're on glaucoma drops, those chemicals can irritate the eye, and that can cause inflammation, and that can produce excessive mucus, and that can cause problems. The eyelids can be an issue. So if you look at the oil glands on the eyelids, the oil glands can become a little bit more blocked as you get older, and the oil becomes thicker and less able to come out onto the surface of the eye, and that's quite common. People talk about omega-3 and omega-6 oils. So if you think about sunflower oil, that's quite high in omega-6, and then oils like fish oils and walnut oil are quite high in omega-3. And so I try and encourage my patients with dry eyes to take more omega-3 and less omega-6. Now, what people don't often realize is that there's only one enzyme in the body that deals with omega-3 and omega-6, and it prefers omega-6 to omega-3. And omega-6 is the one that causes inflammation in the eyelids. So unless you reduce down the omega-6, there's no point in increasing the omega-3, because your eyelid will preferentially use the omega-6. So if you are wanting to try and increase, for instance, trying to cook with a walnut oil or a higher omega-3 oil, then the best way to do that is to also reduce the sunflower oil and vegetable oils in your diet as well. Now, just moving on to what's highlighted here in bold, which is the eye drops irritating the eye. Well, most of the glaucoma drops well, I would probably say all the glaucoma drops are designed to lower pressure. They're not really designed to look after the surface of the eye. In fact, they're designed, and particularly the early versions of these drops, are designed to break down the surface of the eye, break down the tear film to get the chemical to lower the pressure into the eye as quickly as possible, so that the medicine can get a license from the Medicines Authority to say it genuinely does lower the pressure in a significant way. So that when the scientists are designing these drops, they're not really thinking about the integrity of the surface of the eye. And so what you need to do, I mean, obviously you're going to have to use the glaucoma drops to some degree, but the key is to be aware that they're not designed to look after the health of the eye at all in terms of dryness. So it's probably worth thinking, well, 10 minutes before popping a dry eye drop in, and then doing the glaucoma drop, and then maybe 10 minutes afterwards popping some more dry eye drops in for a few for another half an hour after that, to kind of like treat them with caution, use them, but kind of be aware that they are going to disrupt the dry eye problem. Now, a lot of the original glaucoma drops contain preservatives, and we know a lot about preservatives now, and the reason they're in the glaucoma drops is they reduce the risk of infection in the bottle passing onto the surface of the eye. But the problem is the preservatives are quite disruptive and they cause a lot of problems with dry eye. So most manufacturers now have drifted away from using preserved dry eye drops, and they use preservative-free dry eye drops. So I suspect most people on this call are now using a preservative-free form of a glaucoma drop as opposed to a preserved form. And the manufacturers have got around this in a number of ways. They either use single dose units, so you just open that one dose unit up for that day and use it and throw it away. That was kind of the first way of doing this. Or they use 1 micron filters on the tips of the bottles, which can sometimes make it tricky to squeeze the medicine through, and you have to wait for the pressure to build. Or they use a pump mechanism, which also pushes the fluid through a 1 micron filter, or uses kind of like sort of like a stopcock type technique where the drop comes out but nothing else can get back in, and they're sort of like pump mechanism drops. So when you're looking at your glaucoma medicines, and if you are concerned about preservatives, it's worth just thinking whether or not you are using one of the preservative-free applicators. Now, the other thing that is quite common for dry eye is environmental factors. For instance, air conditioning can be quite bad in the car or at work if you're sat underneath an air conditioning fan. And being exposed to wind can sometimes make your dry eye symptoms worse. So it's important that if you're outdoors, you wear sort of, if it's sunny and bright, sunglasses perhaps with some side protection. Central heating is a big issue. Particularly, when the winter months come on, people start using their central heating a lot more, and that can make dry eye quite bad as well. So it's worth being aware of environmental factors. Okay, so just coming on to, so most of you probably realize now that you're getting dry eye, probably from that list of reasons why it's happening. You can sort of relate to why you're getting dry eye. Well, what do we do about it? Well, when you see an eye doctor or an optometrist, we use these 2 dyes, the fluorescein dye, which is the yellow dye I talked about earlier, and the green dye, which binds to mucus. And we use these 2 dyes to work out what type of dry eye you have. So are you not producing enough tears? Is it more inflammatory? Is it a mucus problem? Is it an eyelid problem? Is the eye opening at night without realizing? And we put these 2 dyes in clinic and have a look on the microscope, and we can tell what's going on. So here's some examples. So this is dry eye, which is very inflammatory. So it's in a typical distribution on the white of the eye, almost like a triangular shape. And if you look amongst there, you can see larger globules of mucus, which is staining with this green dye. So this is someone who's been really struggling with their dry eye. They've been putting loads of lubricants in, but it's just not getting better. And in situations like this, we tend to give some steroids to calm down the goblet cells, calm down some of these reactions, inflammatory reactions on the eye, and then treat it copiously with lubrication. And then the patient would tend to start to improve a little bit. Here's a similar case, not quite so severe. A small amount of mucus, not really as much. Again, a good good typical location of dry eye, which is between the two eyelids, as you would be looking at that person straight on. And this one would normally just settle down with lots of preservative-free lubrication and wouldn't often need the steroids. Here's the fluorescein dye, and you can see that actually the patient has quite a good tear film. So along the edge of the eyelids, there's quite a lot of fluid there. It's just worth noting that when I put this dye in the eye, I haven't put a drop of lots of fluid in there. I've just touched the inside of the eye with the wetted fluorescent strip. So I'm not adding any fluid. That yellow-green line is the fluid that the patient already has on the surface of the eye. But you can see towards the lower aspect here that it's breaking down. And this is someone who actually had quite poor lid closure and also had quite a lot of blepharitis. And that's irritating around the edge of the eye. And so that needed to be treated. Here's some other different examples of dry eye. Again, with the fluorescein, we can see areas where it's breaking down on the surface of the eye, and we can see sometimes little soft spots or dimple breaks, and we can see lines where there's maybe an edge of inflammation or some irritation from the lid. So we often see the patterns of the distribution of where the staining is to try and work out what treatment is needed. These are the oil glands I was talking about earlier. So there are 30 or so on the upper lid and about the same on the lower lid. And they open up just between the eyelashes and the surface of the eye, the edge of the lid that's in contact with the surface of the eye. And if you look carefully with a magnifying mirror, you should be able to see whether or not they're all blocked or they look yellow. And if you apply some heat and a little bit of pressure, you can almost feel that the eye goes a bit greasy afterwards, which is a sign that the oil's coming out. When they get blocked, they get quite sore, they can get quite itchy. And if you're not producing enough oil, the tear film of the eye breaks down. There's just a little bit more about preservatives. So I mentioned about they reduce how intact the tear film is on the eye. They cause damage and inflammation and loss of the goblet cells. And they actually try and convert this mucous membrane on the surface of the eye almost to be more like skin. So they roughen it up quite a bit. So I would definitely suggest avoid using preservatives in glaucoma eye drops if you're going to be on them for a long time, or using a combination of drops. Right, okay, well, let's talk about just some real practical things. You know, what can you do now to try and make things better? Well, first of all, you should be aware from the talk earlier about whether you've got some of the symptoms of dry eye. Now try and think about removing some aggravating factors. So, you know, simple things like the environment, making sure that, you know, you're avoiding air conditioning or excessive heat. And then think about supplementing the tear film of your eye with the correct drops. And ideally, you want to be using some preservative-free artificial tears. And what you can do straight away is to determine if you have got dry eye is to use a preservative-free artificial tear every 1 to 2 hours for a few weeks and just see if that actually makes things better. Now, if you're not getting better and you're not making progress, it's probably worth seeing someone just to get an idea what's going on with the meibomian glands, and also looking at other ways to perhaps reduce the loss of tears. So I've got some pictures coming up in a minute of some punctal plugs that we use to try and stop the tears from draining away. Occasionally, you may have got yourself into such a vicious cycle that actually you need to have some steroid drops to calm down some of that inflammation. And also for some people which have kind of like an inflammatory type dry eye, we sometimes put them on cyclosporin drops longer term. Now, if you've got into a bit of a state and there's quite a lot of mucus there on the eye, you might need some acetylcysteine drops, which help to clear up the mucus. So clearly the last couple here are going to be tricky to be able to do yourself unless you see an optometrist or an eye doctor. But it's probably worth just getting the simple things right first, which is, for instance, trying to remove the aggravating factors. So let's just talk about the dry eye drops. So with these, I think it's really important to be logical because there's so many different ones out on the marketplace. It can be quite overwhelming. I mean, I've just taken a screenshot here from a shopping website, and I put in preservative-free dry eyes, and hundreds and hundreds of results came up. And the first 4 or 5 in the sponsored section were not even preservative-free anyway. So it's definitely worth just double-checking they are preservative-free. And then just think about the mechanism. So the bottom left here, this one, this Hydromed has got a 1 micron filter in the tip there, and that's how it can be provided preservative-free. This Artelac one is a pump action one, a bit like the Hylo Fort in the bottom right corner. And then you've got another couple here that I've not heard of, but Hypermelos is a very commonly used lubricant, but I'm not convinced that bottle to me looks preservative-free. So it's worth just double checking that, even though it's come up in the preservative-free section. And then the more specialist drops, well, the steroid drops and the drops we use for mucus production, these are ones which you're not going to be able to get hold of unless they're sort of on your repeat prescriptions or prescribed by an eye doctor. Punctal plugs. So punctal plugs, the idea of the plug is that it sits in the tear duct and prevents natural tears from washing away. We use these in clinic quite a lot when patients are really struggling. They're putting the drops in every 1 to 2 hours, and they're not really making much progress. And it can be, and by putting the plug in, what we're doing is meaning that their natural tears last longer and don't wash away quite so quickly. And also all the dry eye drops that they put in have a longer effect so that they don't have to put them in quite as much. And they come in different designs. So you can have plugs which go down inside the tear ducts. They don't rub on the surface of the eye. And I quite like using those from a diagnostic perspective because they don't irritate the surface of the eye. But we can also use ones that, like the far right picture here, which sit in the tear duct and last a lot longer. And they can, when you come back to clinic, we can actually see them there, so we know if they're working or not. Here's some pictures of some punctal plugs. So this is a little tear duct which drains the tears away naturally down into the nose. And on the right, you can see intracannulicular plugs. This is one that's going to go right down inside that duct. I'm just about to push that down with some forceps. And then on the left, you can see a plug which is just sitting sort of flush just on the surface of the duct. And that's a silicone plug, which will last a lot longer. And that will stay in there for as long as it stays in there in terms of whether or not it falls out or if I pull it out. The intracannulicular plugs tend to last for around 2 to 3 months. Okay, so just to summarize then, I think what would be really, really great is if you can go away from this talk thinking, do you know what, some of the symptoms that Mr. Calladine's been talking about at the start of this lecture, they sound very much like what I've got. This sounds like I've got dry eye. Okay, now try the simple things, use preservative-free lubricants a lot. Try and keep the oil glands going on the surface of the eye with a warm compress and cleaning of the eyelids. If you're really not making progress, you probably just need to get help to try and diagnose what type of dry eye you have and whether you need any additional treatments. So try your best to look after the surface of the eye. So I talked about heat treatments. So the oils, the meibomium oil, which are in the glands, is very sensitive to temperature in terms of its melting point. So it's designed to melt around 37, 38 degrees. And the eyelid temperature is around sort of like 35, 36. So if you just warm it up a little bit, then it will melt quite quickly. It can accumulate around the edges of the eyelids. And in terms of cleaning of the eyelids, the thing I recommend to patients is to run a basin of hot water, put 1 drop of traditional baby shampoo, so 1 drop in a basin of hot water, so it's really dilute, and to use a flannel and then soak the warmth of the water on the eye for sort of 2 to 3 minutes, and then pop a cotton bud in there and just give the eyes a really good scrub, looking at maybe using a times 15 mirror. So that's a really, really important way of cleaning the eyes. With the preservative-free drops, be logical, but also double check. Because I mean, I myself typed in preservative-free drops, and a lot of them came up and they weren't preservative-free. And there are different types. They all have slightly different active ingredients, and some active ingredients will be better for some people. And there won't be a specific rule as to which is best for who. But for instance, there's like sodium hyaluronate, which is a component of tears. There's carmelose, which is a lubricant drop. And it's just trying to perhaps just logically try one for a week, a lot, every hour or two, and make a note and see how you are at the end of the week, and then try a different one. And if the other one's better, stick with that. If it's worse, go back to the one that you've done yourself. And that's kind of like a very safe way to self-medicate with these. If you are really struggling, then perhaps think about plugs or steroid drops to help calm down some inflammation and preserve your natural tears. But in order to get those treatments, you will have to seek kind of secondary help, really. Okay, so just before, I'm just going to close my door because my kids are up to stuff. Sorry about that. Right, just before I finish, I'm just going to talk about something which we're really proud of, which we've been working with the Glaucoma Society on, and it's our Project DocuPlan. So a while ago now, I could see that lots of patients were struggling to get glaucoma care, and what I think is really nice is that we have a lot of shared objectives with the Glaucoma Society. We're trying to build awareness of glaucoma. We're trying to support wherever we can through education, like this session about dry eye. We want to try and increase the options that people have in terms of accessing care, and we're trying to provide affordable services to try and supplement and help the NHS, but as an alternative to the NHS for patients that are really struggling. And really, we want to try and help bring some peace of mind. The problems are getting worse. There's quite a long waiting list now to see a consultant for glaucoma. There's a lot of patients suffering from glaucoma, and it's only set to increase in the next decade. We've been working with the Glaucoma Society to have support groups to find out what are the sort of the coal-face problems, the burning questions that people are suffering from, and it's really access to consultant-led care and answers, which is primarily up there. There are lots of kind of virtual NHS type remote services being offered at the moment, but the concerns that I have and that my patients have is that often it leaves them with more questions than answers and can create more anxiety. But that's the only way that the NHS is trying to deal with the workload at the moment. We've, on the back of that, tried to design our new remote service, which I think really does bring peace of mind. It's consultant-led. It's designed to be convenient. It's not geographically bound, so you can visit your local Occuplan optometrist and then get a report produced by me and the team of consultants here. It allows you to get a great understanding of the level of your disease, how often you should be seen, and whether or not things are progressing. And we're trying our best to make sure it's personalized in terms of offering calls and support and even face-to-face consultations if needed. We're in the process of launching this, so if it is something which you think might be relevant to you and to help provide the answers that you need, we're initially running a priority list because we're expecting it to be quite a popular service, and there are parts of the country where we have more Occuplan infrastructure. So we're going to try and prioritize those areas initially just to try and help as many people as quickly as possible. But if you are on that priority list and we can see that you're in an area where we need to try and develop some local support for you, then the team are ready to do that. Okay, so that is it. Thank you very much. I will just end my screen share now.
That was brilliant, Dan. Thank you so much.
So I feel like
Wow.
I've talked quite a lot there. It's very strange talking to a blank screen, I have to say.
Oh, well, I promise you we're all here. The questions are flooding in. So yes, I certainly learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else did as well. So we've got 20 minutes. So I'm going to try and cram in as many questions as we can.
Yeah,
I hope you don't mind being put on the spot.
No,
I do
that's
always
fine.
just say to everybody at the beginning of this, if you've got any questions, please do type them in the question and answer box. If somebody else has asked a question that you want to know the answer to, if you hover your mouse over it, or you can click the thumbs up and it will bump it up to the top, so I can make sure that I ask the most popular questions. And we will get kind of rattling through. I did have a couple that had been submitted by email, so I'm going to start with them. The first being, I have dry eye and also hay fever. Standard eye drops for hay fever. The leaflet says these drops shouldn't be used by people with dry eye. Do you have any alternative suggestions?
Yes, so this is quite a common problem, because sodium chromoglycate, which I suspect is the one that the patient's talking about, is it really stings quite badly, actually, and it's available over the counter, and it usually comes with preservatives. So it's one to be avoided, really, if you've got dry eye issues, and particularly if you're on glaucoma drops as well. There are alternatives. So for acute periods where it's really bad, it's actually probably better to have the odd drop of a preservative-free steroid, which is very unlikely to cause the pressure to go up just for the odd drop, but can often have an effect that lasts 10 days. So if you've got someone who's got quite severe hay fever, you might just need the odd little drop of a preservative-free steroid. People are always really cautious about using steroids, but when they're used in a very kind of like sensible way, they're very good. The alternative is a drop called opatanol. So opatanol. And opatanol is only twice a day, and it's a mast cell stabilizer and antihistamine. So if I have patients who have dry eye and they're on glaucoma medicines and they're struggling with sodium chromoglycate, then obviously I think about the odd drop of preservative-free steroid, but I would normally suggest opatanol on the run-up to the hay fever season, so it can stabilize the surface of the eye. So to start perhaps in end of January, early February, March, have a couple of months of that, and it means you'll be starting the year in a much better position. And then not forgetting the tablets, of course. So cetirizine, like a non-sedating antihistamine. So cetirizine is now available over the counter.
That's great, thank you. We've had somebody else who's kind of contacted us. They've clearly had a lot going on with their eyes. They've had cataracts, they've got glaucoma, they use monoprost, and they use thiolose drops for dry eye, have also had blepharitis in the past. They get blurring of the vision. It's not constant, but they're wondering if that might be dry eye. Kind of
if we think back,
it.
So if we think back to the first bit of the talk where I talk about symptoms of dry eye and stress the importance of an intact tear film for clarity of vision.
Yeah.
So I'm almost certain that if they're getting fluctuating vision, it's dry eye, because that's fluctuating over the day and with blinking. They'll probably find if they use a dry eye drop every hour for a few days, obviously not at night, but just in the day, that actually things would start to improve a little bit. And I think with that sort of case, I would just recommend that kind of self-care logical approach. Look at thiolose. Well, thiolose is one type of preservative-free dry eye drop. So perhaps get another type and another type and just compare week on week how the symptoms are, because it may be that you're better suited to a sodium hyaluronate drop or a carmelose drop, or one that's a little bit thicker. Because of course, slightly thicker drops will be a little bit more blurry when they go in, because they're making things a bit more greasy, but they may last a bit longer. So just trying to get that balance right, really. So yeah, just have an experiment. You know, it sounds like dry eye. I don't know what else it could be remotely like this, but it sounds like dry eye. Therefore, get some preservative-free dry eye drops, try some different brands, and try and find one that you like. just one thing to say on this, because of course these dry eye drops are not cheap, and the GPs are often quite reluctant to prescribe them. So when you do find one you like, a lot of the sales websites offer kind of like a 3 for, not quite 3 for 2, but 3 for cheaper than buying 3 separate ones. And they often do these things called subscribe and save, and this is kind of a way to try and get the price down. I did a bit of research myself, and I worked out I could get one for like about £10, and normally it's retailing about £18, just by buying 3 at once and doing a subscribe and save every 4 or 5 months. So if you find one you like, there are cleverer ways of getting hold of it.
Great advice, thank you. We've had a question that says, I use TrueSop. Using these drops sting briefly after administration. How do I know if it's just the drops or whether it's dry eye?
Well, TrueSop sting because they're acidic. In order to dissolve the active ingredient, the actual solution needs to be acidic. And you might think, gosh, why am I putting acid in my eye? But in many ways, acidic drops are less harmful than alkalinic drops, which can be really bad for the surface of the eye, because alkaline drops would kind of, well, we always talk about alkaline burns being extremely serious because they break down the junctions between epithelial cells. But acidic drops don't do that. They almost kind of like roughen up the surface, and they don't really cause too many long-term problems apart from allergic type reactions and hypersensitivity reactions. But the reason they're stinging is because they're acidic and your eyes are dry. So when you're putting them in, it's like putting lemon juice in a cut. So what you need to do here is, well, first of all, what's the alternative? So there is a more pH neutral version of that, which is Azaga, which is a suspension. So because it's not acidic, it's more milky. So it might be worth talking to your ophthalmologist about, could you try that? If you do need to be on TrueSop, then there are preservative-free versions of that as well now available through some manufacturers. So you could try a preservative-free version. If that's not working and you still just need to use a TrueSop, then just be aware of what it's doing. It is going to sting. So what I would probably recommend you do is maybe 10-15 minutes before you put it in, pop a preservative-free dry eye drop in. And you might think, well, that means the TrueSop's not going to get in the eye because it's protected with the dry eye drop. The reality is it probably will still get in the eye. And it's probably worth coinciding it with an appointment with the optician just to make sure your pressures have not gone up after a few weeks of doing that. And then after you've put it in, wait sort of 10 minutes and then put lots of dry eye drops in. Again, making sure they're preservative free. So if I was that patient now, I'm thinking it's really hard to see an ophthalmologist anyway. So what could I do? Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll get a preservative-free drop that suits me. I'll use it before I put the TrueSop in. I'll put the TrueSop in about 10 minutes later. I'll keep doing that for a couple of weeks and use lots of lubricants afterwards as well. And then I'll book into my optician and get a pressure check and just make sure that you're kind of where you need to be. And then you've kind of managed that problem yourself, and hopefully your eyes will start to feel a bit better. And then don't forget all the simple stuff that I mentioned, you know, the hot compressors, the environmental factors. These things often amalgamate, and it's not just one thing.
Fabulous. Great, thank you. We've had one that says, I thought baby shampoo was an old school method of managing blepharitis. Would you not recommend other products like solutions or wipes?
Oh, I do love a bit of old school sometimes. I mean, I think that, you know, people keep trying to reinvent the wheel here. And when you look at some of the ingredients of the wipes and the tea tree oil wipes and various things, I mean, the list of ingredients would give you nightmares if you looked up what each of these individual things do. And baby shampoo is the same. I mean, it's, you know, it's full of nasty things, which if you put it neat on the skin or on the eye is going to be terribly bad for you. But really what you need is a detergent and some heat. And you want the detergent to be as minimal as possible. And my slight concern with some of the wipes is the detergent concentrations are very high. So if you're going to use a detergent, why not use as least as you possibly can to try and get the benefits without the negatives? And if you think of like getting grease off a pan in your washing up bowl, you often don't need much fairy liquid to get the grease off the pan. And what you're trying to do is get the grease off the eyelids. So by putting like one drop in a basin of water, you're using hardly any. And I personally would have thought that's better than using a wipe. Now, some people prefer the wipes because they're just a bit more convenient and a bit easier. But then let's think about what else you're doing. So you're using a flannel. It's going to be wet. It's going to be moist and warm. And you're getting the heat on there at the same time. So you're doing two things at once. You're doing the heat and you're doing a bit of detergent. And there's some water in there and wetness to help carry the detergent and the oil away from the eye. So if you're just going to use a wipe, then you're going to have to do a separate heat bag first and then the wipe. So I just like to try and keep things cost effective. A bottle of baby shampoo will last you like a year and cost you probably a third of the wipes that might last you a month. So yeah, that's kind of my view on that.
Fabulous. Wow, we've got loads of questions. We will do our best to rattle through them all. I will also put the helpline phone number up at the end if we don't get any. So as quickly as we can, when cleaning the ocular surface, does this mean the skin around the eye and the eyelids or on the surface of the eye itself?
Oh, sorry, I missed that one. Could you just repeat that?
When cleaning the eye, does this mean the skin around the eyes and the eyelid or the surface of the eye itself?
Definitely don't want to clean the surface of the eye. Okay. You want to clean the lids and the roots to the eyelashes. The surface of the eye shouldn't really be rubbed. Okay, so ideally a ×15 or a ×20 mirror, which you can buy for not very much and good lighting. And then you want to heat up the lids, and then with a cotton bud with the mirror, you want to just clean the roots of the eyelashes. Because what you're trying to do is just clean where the oil collects and the allergens collect, and where you can get things like Demodex and various things, little infections that can build up along the roots of the eyelids.
That's great, thank you. Somebody's asked, can you use plugs if you have eye stents? So eye stents are little stents used for managing glaucoma. They help the drainage out of the eye, if anyone's not
familiar. So this literally comes back to this very first slide. And the reason I focused on this kind of where are we focusing on in the eyes, because sometimes there's confusion with like the fluid draining in the eye and glaucoma and the fluid draining in tears. And they are two very separate things, okay? So the eye stents inside the eye have no relevance at all to the surface of the eye. So a punctal plug is a completely separate system. So yes, you can have both.
Great, thank you. Is there a best area of the eye to put the drops in?
Well, that's a good point actually, because a lot of people pull the eyelid down quite aggressively when they're putting drops in, and that can actually cause problems with lid laxity and inflammation. I personally prefer the dry eye drops that you shoot in with a kind of like a pump mechanism, which you don't really have to do much with touching the eye at all, because you can just look at it and just fire it, and you don't actually have to pull the eyelid down because it comes out almost in a straight line. Obviously, you just normally put the drops in the lower lid, so you just pull the lower lid down, look up, and put the drops in. But what I like about the pump ones is that you don't actually have to pull it down very much. You can support your hand like this, and it shows you how to do it in the packets, and just like that, and you can just look at it and pump it, and it hits the eye without having to pull the lid down very much. So, I'm a big fan of the pump mechanism drops. I know a lot of people like them, but a lot of people hate them. Many just put it in the lower lid or pump it out the eye. If you're really struggling with getting the drops in, a couple of little tips. Okay, so you don't need to refrigerate a lot of these drops, but if you did refrigerate them, you'll feel the cold that goes on the eye if you've got it in the eye, and you'll feel it on the cheek if you've missed. So I often say to people to refrigerate the drops, not because they need to, but because of the temperature and feeling that sensation of blinking and going, oh gosh, yeah, it's all over my eye. And then you've got it in. And then the second tip is, if you really are struggling, you can lie flat on your back, and then you can hold the eye above the drop above the eye and squeeze it and drop it down into the corner of the eye there with your head tilted to one side. And then as you roll your head back, blink, and it just rolls into the eye. And that's kind of a really foolproof way of getting in. So just to say that again, so you're lying on your back, your head's completely flat on your back. You make a little pocket there. You put the 2 or 3 drops in, and then you blink as you tilt your head back to straight, and all the drops will just go into the eye.
That's brilliant. Thank you. You talked about mucus in the eye, but does having dry eye also increase mucus in your nose?
Yeah, so the mucus builds up on the eye because of an imbalance, right? So if you're not producing enough water and you get irritation on the eye, the irritation then produces more mucus. The mucus can build up. It doesn't usually go down the tear duct. It tends to collect as a white, sticky secretion along the corner of the eyelid and on the eyelashes, or it binds to the surface of the eye. If you're getting rhinitis and mucus in the nose, you may have another problem like an allergic rhinitis or some kind of chronic sinusitis. So I guess it's probably worth thinking about some kind of nasal treatment, like a short-term nasal spray, and probably worth just chatting to the GP about that, because the tears drain down into the nose, and if you have a blockage down in the nose, you tend to get a watery eye to some degree. So they're not always linked, but it may be that you're sensitive to some kind of allergen, which could irritate the eyes as well, I guess.
Great, thank you. We've had a question asking, how would you know if your glaucoma drops are preservative free?
Oh, okay. Well, it should say on them if they've got any preservatives in them. So, and they do normally say, I think they are obliged to say if they're preservative free or not.
Right.
But it's a good question, and it's worth spending a bit of time double checking, or asking someone who's knowledgeable. So your optometrist, for instance, or doing a bit of an internet search.
The helpline, if you talk through your drops with the helpline team as well, they'll be able to help you out.
Yeah.
We've had, there's quite a few kind of questions about blepharitis and kind of how it kind of connects itchy eyelids, heat and cleaning. Is that so?
Yeah, so the reason blepharitis happens is because you've got this transition phase between skin and mucous membrane. And the skin is quite robust, it's quite an intact barrier. And mucous membranes just absorb allergens, produce mucus, can get irritated. And when you've got a transition point between skin and mucus, on the edge there is where the blepharitis happens. Okay. So you're trying your best to kind of maintain the intact skin on the eyelids without the moisture and the wetness from the eye irritating that, but at the same time trying to kind of reduce any inflammation or irritation around the area that's causing them to become quite red and sore. And then you're putting glaucoma drops in, which are chemicals which are causing inflammation. So it's almost kind of like self-fulfilling that if you're on glaucoma drops, you'll have blepharitis because you're irritating that mucous membrane on the edge of the eyelid all the time. So what you need to do is just the simple things. So making sure, again, you're cleaning the eyelids. I quite like my basin of hot water, drop of baby shampoo, and a cotton bud, and the heat, and making sure the roots of the eyelashes are nice and clean. In some situations, people go on an antibiotic tablet called doxycycline, which is used sometimes for people with blepharitis. It has an anti-inflammatory effect, and it reduces the inflammation on the edge of the eyelid. And that's something that your GP probably could help you with. The only thing to be aware of with the summer coming up, it can make the skin quite light sensitive. So it's just be careful about that. Sometimes you need like a short course of steroids to calm down the blepharitis. We do see that quite a bit. I think I think unfortunately it's kind of inevitable. If you're putting, as I said, if you're putting glaucoma drops in, you're bound to have some blepharitis. And it's just making sure that blepharitis doesn't disturb the surface of the eye too much, and trying to maintain the lubrication, the preservative-free drops, and the cleaning. But just accepting it, unfortunately, is a bit of a necessary evil, unless you then go off glaucoma drops, either with laser or a stent or surgery. But that's not easily accessible for most people to be able to just say, oh, I want to have a stent, I want to have some laser. The waiting list for these treatments are long, and to go privately is expensive. So, whatever you can do in the short term to lessen the blepharitis will help. It's a tricky one, really.
Absolutely. I'm very, very conscious that we're at 8 o'clock. So I am going to launch our second poll, and I'm going to pop up on the screen the information about our next sessions. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask one last question because I want to squeeze one more in. Appreciate many of you may need to nip off, but thank you ever so much for joining us. How often should silicone punctal plugs be replaced, or can they last indefinitely without causing infection?
Well, that's a really interesting question, actually, because I've had some patients over the years where they've had a plug in, a silicone plug, and they've come back in 3 months and it's still there, and they're better. And I will leave it another 3 months, and then you leave another 3 months, it's still there and they're still better. And you leave another 3 months, and it gets about a year, and you think, yeah, maybe we should replace this for a fresh one. But there's been no specific need to replace it unless it's causing a problem. The only thing I have seen is sometimes you get build-up of secretions actually in the little dimple in the plug, and almost a bit of I know it can't be calcification because the silicone can't calcify, but you almost get a little bit of kind of a calcium or a rough build-up on the edge of the plug sometimes, which can then start to irritate the surface of the eye, so then we'd replace it. But as long as it's there, it's not irritating, it can almost stay in really indefinitely. But honestly, probably I haven't left one for more than a year where I've said, look, it's been in there a year now, let's just replace it with another one. Did I need to? Maybe not. Maybe it would have been fine.
Fabulous. Thank you ever so much. We have really pushed this to get every minute out of the session, but I certainly have learned a lot, and I'm sure looking at the poll results so far, everybody else has as well. So thank you ever so much to everybody who has joined us. Just a couple of last bits from me before we disappear off. We have had on our call tonight, we've got a researcher who we're doing a little bit of work with. She's doing some research into visual symptoms in glaucoma, and she has got a questionnaire, a survey that she's doing at the moment. So in your follow-up email, there is a link to that. So if anybody is willing and able to give their time to complete that survey, she would be incredibly grateful. We've got 2 sessions coming up over the summer. We asked you whether you wanted sessions in July and August, and we had a fairly resounding yes, please. So on the 22nd of July, we are covering new types of eye drops, side effects of glaucoma drops, and the impact that they have with other medication. And that's with Professor Anthony Kawaja. And we are delighted to have Dan back with us in August, doing an introductory session into glaucoma and lifestyle factors. So we're really looking forward to Dan to chat again in a couple of months' time. I'm really sorry that we haven't got around to answering everybody's questions this evening. If you still have questions that you would like to know the answers to, our helpline would be delighted to help you. They're open Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. until 5 p.m. Or you can email them anytime. Their phone number is 01233 648170, or you can email them at helpline@glaucoma.uk. Thank you ever so much to everybody for joining us this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us, and I hope you all have a wonderful month, and we shall see you again in July. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Robin.